We're here today for our transformation, our TRC Talks session number 3 with Executive Director Leslie Bonshor, Vice President Leslie Bonshor. I was just saying, I feel so prepared and ready today. Vice President Leslie Bonshor of Indigenous Health, Miranda Kelly, Director of Indigenous Women and Family Health, and Director of Indigenous Research, Brittany Bingham, the Aunties. I'm Nikki Zawadzki. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs, and I'm a strategic lead here at Aboriginal Health. And I'm a white settler, a first-generation settler. My people are Polish and French. And I just want to express my gratitude for everyone who's joined us in the past and who's joining us for the first time today, for being able to learn and share together. And today, the Aunties are going to be discussing National Indigenous Peoples Day. So I will leave it to them. Oops, here we go. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Nikki. Welcome, everyone. I know I see the numbers climbing here as participants are joining. Welcome, Israel. Good day. Just want to do a real quick acknowledgement of the lands that we're calling in from here today, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I think Miranda and Brittany and Nikki are all in Vancouver here along with myself. So just to do our introductions as well, as Nikki mentioned, our names. If you could flip to the slide, that is our introduction, please, Nikki. Next one. So I'm Leslie Bonshor, and in our culture and our practice is to introduce ourselves by our family, where we come from, who we belong to, who claims us as their own. So I am from the Joe family, from the Shakton First Nation, a part of the Stalo Nation out in the Fraser Valley. And that top big picture is around 1969, a family gathering, which is now a great big shopping mall and several residential places in behind those trees. It seems quite funny to see that picture every now and then. So that's the Joe side of the family. And my father is the late Len Fisher, also known as Siamatel. And Siamatel is a old name in Stalo territory. And the one below to the left is our smaller family. So my grandmother and grandfather and my grandmother's 2 sisters and their kids. I'm on the lap of the lady third in from the right. That's my grandmother, Ethel Fisher. And I pretty much spent most of my life being raised by my grandmother. Another cultural practice of many of our families. And then the next picture there, the bottom right, is my current day family. My husband, Mike, and my 2 grandsons, Carson and Benson, my daughter, Carly, and her partner, Anthony, my son, Clayton, and his partner, Jenny, and my stepson, Riley. And, you know, when we introduce ourselves this way and talk about our families, we do it as a way to hold ourselves accountable to who we are and what we represent. So my first role in life is as grandma, and then mom, and then sister, auntie, friend, and life partner to Mike. And now I will hand it over to, oh, and I guess I should say what I do for a living. Which is always sometimes what I forget. I'm happy to lead all things Indigenous health here at Vancouver Coastal Health, and most recently, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, been appointed the first ever Vice President of Indigenous Health. So honored to hold that role for the first time, and can't wait for either Brittany, Miranda, Bree, Priscilla, somebody else to take my place someday down the road when I finally retire from this work. But just honored that Vancouver Coastal Health has made this position and have created a spot for me at the table at the senior executive level, and it really is just such an honor to be there. I'll pass it over to Brittany now.
Itaquail Teuk Messiah. My name is Brittany Bingham. I am of mixed ancestry from the Sechelt Nation on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. And I'm a mom of 2 kids, Natalie and Sean, and a wife to Mark. And my role here on the team is the Director of Indigenous Research on Leslie's team. And that's a joint role with the Center for Gender and Sexual Health Equity. And also I'm an assistant professor of social medicine at UBC. So really glad to be here for our 3rd TRC talk. To you, Miranda.
Aiswail, Tilyan Telsqui, Talitzlaqua Thawali. My ancestral name is Tilyan, and I'm Stalo from Sawali First Nation, and also have ties to Cowichan, Sumas, and Snuneymuxw First Nations on my dad's side, and mixed settler ancestry on my mom's side. My grandparents are in the bottom left there of the photos, and they're all on the other side in the spirit world now. The top is my current family today, my husband's side of the family, my side of the family, and on the bottom right is some of my chosen family here in the urban area of Vancouver, my fellow birth workers. So I'm a granddaughter, a daughter, a mother, a wife, a sister, an auntie, a doula, childbirth educator, and now most recently the Director of Indigenous Women and Family Health with Vancouver Coastal. And it's my pleasure to be here and to be among my fellow aunties doing this talk. And I always learn as much from them as I can offer. So thank you to both of you.
So I just want to remind everyone today that some of the discussion might be triggering or upsetting. Here, I'll put my video back on. There I am. It's normal for everyone to feel uncomfortable when we're having discussions like this. So please take care of yourself and do what you need to do if you're struggling, draw on your supports. We're going to provide a list of supports and resources at the end of today's session. Our internal resources are formerly known as the EFAP counseling, are now known as LifeWorks. And we'll pop a link for that into the chat in just a moment. There's also a PDF that I'll share towards the end of supports for Indigenous folks, particularly folks who are residential school survivors. And just a reminder again to everyone that our Indigenous colleagues have a lot to deal with right now. And our work as non-Indigenous folks is to take up the call to action and stand beside folks and supporting them and doing that important work, because everyone is very tired. It's emotionally laborious to do this on an ongoing basis for our Indigenous colleagues. So it's our turn to step up. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, so we've called these the Truth and Reconciliation Talks. And this is our 3rd session. And we started this after the news from the Kamloops Indian Residential School that came out, and we knew that people wanted an opportunity to discuss this and put their feelings somewhere, but also the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action were talked about. Nikki, could you mute yourself? And what we wanted to do was really help people understand where the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action were and how they resonate with us in the health system. We decided that the most effective way for us as Indigenous women and as Indigenous matriarchal leaders was to use our Aunties Circle. And so Aunties Circle actually means we are sitting around the kitchen table and we're having a conversation, and you are listening into our conversation, and we love that. So what you're going to hear from Miranda and Brittany and myself is really our own capital P personal experiences as being Indigenous health leads, working in this way, working for our people. And as Nikki mentioned in the opening, sometimes it's a little exhausting, but of course we're very passionate for this work as well. So most recently, again, we call this talk a little bit of this pulling from the headlines, and pulling from the headlines what is going on all across our nation. And in honor of National Indigenous Peoples Day, which was Monday, June 21st, and it is June 21st every year and has been since 1996, this year was different. This year felt very different. And we felt a need to share with Vancouver Coastal Health something. So our Aboriginal Health leadership team got together on last Friday, and we wanted to send a message out to Vancouver Coastal Health that was somewhere in between uplifting and a somber message of what we're dealing with. So this is what was written, and I'm not sure, some of you may have read it and some of you may have missed it. So let me just share with you what we shared. So dear BCH, the Indigenous Health Team is acknowledging our resilience today and the strength and the tenacity of our ancestors. While we continue to manifest their dreams of a day when this place we call home is free of racism and intolerance, and instead filled with acceptance and kindness for one another so that we can all thrive and prosper, we will rest today from our relentless and tireless efforts to teach, to disrupt, to please, to achieve against what some days appears to be impossible goals, and just be. Today, we will just be who we are, be comfortable with the choices we have made to be useful where it sometimes feels useless. Not everyone comes to work every day to serve their own tribe. Not everyone comes to work every day in the hopes of changing the health and wellness of an entire population. And by that we mean all our relations, the people we are related to. But we do know everyone wants to do better, to be better, to learn more and grow more. Today we rest, and we ask that in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day, that you grow, that you manifest, that you watch over our people today and companion and commit to our ancestors' dreams. Now, some of you that have listened in to our sessions know that our very first session, Miranda shared a beautiful, I don't even know if it's a poem. It's called The Tenets of Companioning. And we've used this language of companioning ever since. And we find it really resonates with people. And we shared it online with this message. I shared it with our Regional Executive Operations Committee one day, and it resonated with folks there. And we will attach it into the chat box, but maybe just to share it, to set the context again. It doesn't take long. Miranda, would you like to read it again, or would you like me to?
Sure, I can.
Okay.
Companioning is about honoring the spirit. It is not about focusing on intellect. Companioning is about curiosity. It is not about expertise. Companioning is about learning from others. It is not about teaching. Companioning is about walking alongside. It is not about leading or being led. Companioning is about being still. It is not about frantic movement forward. Companioning is about discovering the gifts of sacred silence. It is not about filling every painful moment with talk. Companioning is about listening with the heart. It is not about analyzing with the head. Companioning is about bearing witness to the struggles of others. It is not about judging or directing those struggles. Companioning is about being present to another person's pain. It is not about taking or relieving the pain. Companioning is about respecting disorder and confusion. It is not about imposing order and logic. Companioning is about going to the wilderness of the soul with another human being. It is not about thinking you are responsible for finding the way out.
Thank you again, Miranda. Really, companioning, I think, is going to be our word of the year as we bring our colleagues and friends within Vancouver Coastal Health along this journey of Indigenous cultural safety and anti-Indigenous racism, and as we work towards achieving some of the goals and calls to action of truth and reconciliation. There was another comment earlier. As you all know, the three of us work very closely together. So these aunties, we're always talking. And we're always sharing our hopes and dreams. And we're always saying, well, what are we doing today? What are we going to talk about today? How are we going to bring, again, our colleagues some inspiration? How do we help them get unstuck, right? Some people are feeling really stuck in where they're at, not knowing what to do, how to companion, how to walk alongside us, how to get to that allyship. And I know, Miranda, you have another amazing quote as we're sharing this picture. and I have to speak to this picture. Dr. Patty Daly, when we shared this picture out with our leadership update, Patty Daly sent me a note saying, "You look like superheroes." I thought, oh, good. I'm glad we look like superheroes, because some days we feel like we have to be superheroes. And we're always there at the ready to talk about some of the hard topics we have to talk about, but also just amazing that National Indigenous Peoples Day, this conversation we're having today, that we have this strong Indigenous women leadership team, and not that we don't have others, but right now that picture is the women that are behind this team and supporting all of this work. Not always an easy thing to do either, but I think Miranda's just going to share a little quote again while we're on this slide. While you look at all these happy faces, we're always talking about being in some sort of state of grief and a little bit of mild, frustration at any given point about the work that we're doing and the hard work. And sometimes we're able to celebrate things, but not this year. And maybe you could just share your thoughts that you pulled from one of your favorite books.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. So the book is Braiding Sweetgrass, and the quote is, "If grief can be a doorway to love, then let us all weep for the world we are breaking apart so we can love it back to wholeness again." And yeah, this really resonated with me, especially in the context of the conversations we've been having over the last few weeks, talking about companioning and this grief, this collective grief that we're feeling and that we're working through. And last week, talking about how grief and gratitude can coexist. And I thought this quote kind of brought it full circle with linking grief to love. And what is grief? Grief comes from the love that we hold for something that's lost. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, was writing this in the context of environmental grief and the grief that we have for the land and that we've lost, and the wellness of the land. But for me, I think it really applies to what we're talking about in healthcare as well. In coming to this work from a place of unconditional love, and also recognizing that it's going to be hard, and it's probably going to call on our emotions as we start breaking apart the pieces of the system that aren't working. But if we can do that from a place of love, we can bring it up to a state of wholeness where it serves everyone in the way that we really imagine and want and desire for it too. So I just thought that quote helped kind of continue on this conversation that we've been having in linking companioning and grief and love to the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Miranda. I would just remember having this conversation with you. She says, "I want to talk about love." This was Miranda. She says, "I want to talk about love." And I'm like, let's talk about love then. Of course. Why can't we? She said, we don't usually talk about love in healthcare. Right? We don't come into meetings and start talking about, let's ground ourselves in love. But yet, I keep hearing Elder Roberta a little bit in my mind too. And Brittany, I'm going to hand it over to you next. Is Elder Roberta, if you are in her presence and she is opening up a meeting of any kind, or a celebration of any kind, she'll talk about unconditional love. And that idea of unconditional love is what you need in order to be open to receiving and to giving one another something. And I loved your part about, if it wasn't broken, we wouldn't hurt. And if we didn't hurt, we didn't love, right? That's a really important piece to understand, particularly as we ease out of this global pandemic, how much did we hurt? How much did we miss our loved ones, right? That's what everyone's talking about. Can't wait to hug somebody, right? Because we've missed it, because we love them. And we love the collection and the getting together and the social part. Brittany, I know you've got some ideas too of what this means for you.
Yeah, I love seeing our team in this photo together. It's such a powerful representation of us all, and kind of the dream to build this dream team, which has been a dream for quite a long time. I love that you're talking about bringing in that concept of love. And I think that's what our elders bring to the table all the time when working with us in all the different capacities that they work with us, not just guiding us through the work, but guiding us as human beings. And in thinking about this, this past few weeks and how people have been feeling, there's a quote from a wonderful person, Iman Salem, that says, you have two superpowers, compassion and vulnerability. Use them. And I really think that that's what's been going on, is that people are maybe feeling ready to engage more deeply in that compassionate space, and to be more vulnerable and understand that a lot of this work is heart-centered work that we're trying to do here, even though we're within a health system.
Absolutely. We're always talking about that. And that's probably one thing I just failed to say is, we want you to be in this conversation, listening in to this Aunties conversation from a place of an open mind and an open heart to receive what we have to offer. Sometimes when we come in, we're coming in with really good intentions, and we always feel like we've over-prepared before these talks, and then things just happen. We just pull stuff out of the air that really are meaningful and we want to share with you. So if we go to the next slide, are we able to? It looks like we might be having technical. Oh, next one. Yeah. So pulling from the headline. So this is, again, another reason why we wanted to share. I don't know what that box is in the middle, or if it's only on my screen. Anyway, I'm going to ignore it. Pulling from the headlines, again, keeping this real, breathing life into the things that are going on for our Indigenous population across the nation. So this year's National Indigenous Peoples Day, one of reflection and change. National Indigenous Peoples Day, a time for reflection, not celebration this year. We're healing the way we want to heal. Monday is National Indigenous Peoples Day. So, we talked about that as a team. Why we sent the message out that we did was because we weren't really celebrating the way we usually would. So you can put it over to the next slide. Oh my goodness, this is not okay. So Nikki would normally ask us.
I'm here.
I'm sorry, let me pose the question. It's fine.
I've been having some tech issues on my end, so my apologies, everyone. It's thrown me off a little today, but that's what we're doing, is being flexible. So yeah, I wanted to ask the aunties today how they usually celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day. This year's a little different, but so how do you normally celebrate it?
Maybe I'll start and then we'll go to Miranda and then Brittany, just so we know which order we're going to go in. I remember years and years ago when this first started, National Indigenous Peoples Day, we were actually copying what the Maoris used to do. And in fact, Vancouver would hold such a wonderful celebration at the art gallery that they would have indigenous groups from all over, including New Zealand, and they would perform on that day out in the art gallery, and it was always so much fun. Lots of music, lots of food, and everybody be so happy and celebrating their Indigenous selves and families. or we'd go to Trout Lake. Our team would be at Trout Lake every year, setting up a booth and seeing lots of folks come to celebrate, stop by the booths. There'd be events for kids, and again, bannock trucks and all of that good stuff, and we would just have a really good day of celebration. This year was definitely different. It did not feel like a celebration, although quietly, I think particularly my husband and I and our family talked about just being so thankful we're able to say we are Indigenous, and that resilience that must have taken of our ancestors, our mothers and grandmothers, aunties, to be strong enough that we survived. We survived when we actually weren't meant to survive in a lot of cases, and a lot of barriers to my identity my whole entire life, from my grandfather enlisting to serve in the war and losing his rights, losing his land and his identity. Really, he was no longer considered an Indigenous person, and lost his status. And so that interrupted our connection for a long time, and then regaining it, just ready to regain it. And my first husband was non-Indigenous, so as an Indigenous woman marrying a non-Indigenous man, I lost my status again. And so just crazy rules that have impacted us. But yeah, you know what, I still choose to say today I'm Indigenous, I am Stalo, and so are my children, and it brings me great pride and privilege to be able to say that.
Thanks, Leslie. What about you, Miranda?
Yeah, so I realized just when you asked this question, as we were preparing for today, that I don't really have one usual way of celebrating, although this time of year, we definitely have, ways of gathering, getting back out on the land. My community of Sawalis having a salmon ceremony, first salmon ceremony tomorrow. That's a ceremony that the community is really working to reclaim. So this is the second annual first salmon ceremony. So around this time of year, I'm usually going home and celebrating with family. Father's Day, my dad's birthday, all around the same time, my birthday coming up next month. So we're being on the land, being with family, and that's how I like to celebrate around this time of year. But for specifically Indigenous Peoples Day, two particular years come to mind. One is just a couple of years ago when I was working as a doula. I ended up being at a birth for a beautiful little Indigenous baby that decided to come on National Indigenous Peoples Day. And that just felt like a beautiful gift to witness birth and the next generation arriving on this day. And as Leslie was talking about, part of celebrating is claiming our identity and feeling okay claiming who we are. So I loved being at that birth. And witnessing that baby receive an Indigenous name, being welcomed into the arms of their family. It was a lovely way to celebrate. And the other year that comes to mind is 2010. I was in the Northwest Territories for my master's practicum, and it's actually a stat holiday in that territory. So all the offices were closed, and everybody in town in Inuvik, where I was, came out to celebrate, Indigenous, non-Indigenous. The local lands there are the traditional territories of the Inuvialuit and Gwich'in. So the Inuvialuit and the Gwich'in were very involved in planning for the day, and I was lucky in my practicum placement to be involved in planning for the day, for the celebrations that happened. And I was actually feeling really, really homesick while I was up there for my practicum. It was 3 months, and I've always lived in Coast Salish territory, and I felt totally out of whack being above the Arctic Circle, 24 hours of daylight. I just felt very homesick, very far from my land and the land that I'm used to. So it actually made me feel more at home to be a part of that community planning for celebration for National Indigenous Peoples Day. And it was really uplifting and heartwarming to see how everybody from the whole community came out to celebrate. The celebrations were right in the middle of town, so you couldn't miss them, and there was nothing else to do that day because everything was closed. So everybody from town was there. And I wished that we had that kind of feel in all cities, in all towns, that everyone came out and celebrated. And I think sometimes, Trout Lake can feel that way when we are allowed to gather, that it is very celebratory, and a lot of people just participate. So yeah, I hope that in future years I'll be able to be in large celebrations like that again.
That
Over
sounds
to you, Brittany.
lovely. Yeah, Brittany.
Yeah, it was interesting for us to reflect on what this day means. I definitely felt different this year. I have been with VCH since about 2015. So my tradition on this day was to actually wear my VCH t-shirt and be down at Trout Lake most years and enjoying those celebrations, eating great food and hearing songs and drumming and celebrations. So that's a great tradition, which definitely missed that this year. But in context to the new holiday that's coming on September 30th this year, I really think that that day will be a day of grief and mourning and acknowledgement of the day of truth and reconciliation. And, maybe that will leave this National Indigenous Peoples Day to be a day to celebrate Indigenous culture, Indigenous joy and celebration, and have 2 different days for that, I think will be wonderful, and an invitation for everyone to celebrate all things Indigenous on that day in a beautiful way. And hopefully next year it will be a celebration.
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, well, that actually sets us up perfectly for our next question, which is how was it different this year? And again, my apologies for this tech glitch, folks. IMITS hasn't been able to help us solve it yet. It's very complicated. So yeah, basically the question is, how was it different for you this year and what did it mean to you?
I think it sounds like we kind of answered both these questions with our first answer, but I also, just bearing in mind our partners on the call here, our colleagues and friends, about what we, again, back to our memo that we sent out to all of VCH staff, what it means to us, but more than that, what does it mean to you? And how will you learn more about the Indigenous people of this country? I was just on Twitter, right? Like just scrolling through Twitter, which sometimes is called doom scrolling, but on that day there was actually quite a few uplifting things and lots of links to information. And I remember looking, I clicked on a map, and I think this map has kind of been going viral. It's a map of Canada, and all across it is color coded of all the nations, all the different nations across this 600 plus nations across Canada, languages. You could kind of scroll over and get deeper and deeper into this map. And maybe, sorry, I didn't rehearse for this, Jake, but maybe you could share that map with the participants. It was so interesting to me, and I thought, how can you argue when we talk about host nations and we honor the traditional lands we're doing our work on? And a lot of times we hear from our colleagues, why do we do these land acknowledgements? What's it about? And we get it from the Indigenous population too, our First Nations friends and families saying, well, it's feeling a little tokenized now, right? Because everybody's just kind of saying it. And we said, well, we got to start somewhere. And we always said we had to start somewhere. We start small, acknowledging land. Just give you pause for a moment to say, where am I standing? What does this mean? Who lived here before? What did they they do on this land before this building was here or before the settlers arrived? And when you can start to think that and you start to go a little deeper, that's what National Indigenous Peoples Day is about. That's about sitting for a little while and just trying to learn a little bit more, go a little deeper with your knowledge. We actually have a photo contest going on right now in Vancouver Coastal Health, just trying to encourage people to take a look at where they reside or where they work and learn a little bit more about the First Nations who lived there previously. I know from here, 2750 East Hastings, we've heard from Hereditary Chief Ian Campbell from the Squamish Nation, so many beautiful stories about this particular area. And I don't do it justice when I try to repeat it, but there were so many healing springs and little streams that went along from the ocean down to False Creek area. And he talks about what they used to do as Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh, because they shared the territory. They're very related. It would talk about what they did in this particular area. So, you know, this whole territory is rich with stories, rich with history, and rich with all of that ecosystem that was here before it became the concrete jungle that it is now. Yeah, so I hope that National Indigenous Peoples Day, as Brittany mentioned, becomes the full day of celebration, the full understanding of all the languages, the full understanding of all the nations. And then we leave space September 30th, which would be something like a November 11th for us, a September 30th to remember all those children, all the lives that have been lost, all the ongoing historical trauma that we go through as a population. So I think that's going to make a big difference for us. We don't have to do everything all in one day. We can celebrate and mourn and have this grief, but actually really celebrate the resilience and the cultural practices, the rich culture that's still available and that we are reclaiming on June 21st.
Yeah, and having the whole month of June as National Indigenous Peoples History Month too, and really focusing. The four of us had a conversation yesterday, a really great conversation. I almost wish we recorded it because it was very lively. But one of the things that really came up in the conversation, excuse me, was a discussion around how Indigenous people, particularly in light of the recent announcement with the residential school in Kamloops, they talked about how Indigenous people are being asked to talk more about their personal experiences of racism and trauma. And so let me just scroll us ahead here. What are your thoughts on this? Have you been asked, and what do you think?
Let's start with Brittany.
Yeah, we have talked a lot about translation exhaustion in relation to this, and how when things come up in the headlines, things come up around truth and reconciliation, around residential schools. There's a lot of responsibility and burden for Indigenous people to educate others. And translation exhaustion was something that was coined by Dr. Twyla Baker. And it's basically the idea that Indigenous people or any other marginalized or racialized group, when they're engaging on a subject like this, must first set the stage by outlining the entire historical context from, up until the current state of affairs, to then begin having a productive conversation on any of these issues. And that's really due to lack of education or background knowledge that the listener has. And this is something that we're working towards getting us all to a baseline knowledge level so we can begin having really productive discussions. And I think that's when the action and the fast pace of moving forward on things is going to happen. And from my perspective in the academic space, this is something that's very common. When we write papers, we have to, outline the entire historical context before we can begin talking about the current day effects on the health and wellness of Indigenous people from colonization. So that's something that I've observed for sure in relation to this.
Can I jump
Yeah.
in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with respect to this translation exhaustion that Brittany was talking about, I've completely felt that in my career. And when the In Plain Sight report came out, I was like, gosh, finally, like now, instead of having to spend, the first 20 minutes of every hour-long presentation going over slides and explaining why racism is real and it's a thing for Indigenous people in the healthcare system, now you can just have one slide to reference the In Plain Sight report. Like, whew, okay, can we all just accept now that this is real, and you can go read that on your own, and now let's move forward with the conversation because we have so much more to say.
Yeah, absolutely, Miranda. I hear you. We've often talked about Dr. Mary Ellen Turple-Lafond's report In Plain Sight as being the truth-telling document that we were needing, just like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's, document and calls to action. The truth-telling has to happen before reconciliation. And part of truth-telling is having others believe us. Believe the truth, acknowledge the truth, so that we can move forward. And again, it's an unfortunate realization, but the in plain sight was a necessary process in order to allow space for the truth telling. And I think about Honorable Murray Sinclair too, when he talks about, again, I'll try to quote, I'm not good at this quoting, because when I hear him, I feel it. So I'm not always remembering his words because I'm busy feeling what he said. So what he said in my feeling was, why did we ask all of those survivors of Indian residential school to tell their story if we weren't going to believe them and if we weren't going to do something with their story? And that just broke me wide open, because I was like, oh, it's like constantly, again, this idea of translation exhaustion is, do we have to tell our story over and over again? And I particularly think about our patients, our clients that come to get their services from us, that this health system, tell us again who you are, why you're here, what got you here, all of this, and a lot of judgment, which I know a lot of people are just, there's this balance between getting the information you need, doing your job, and then how you make someone feel when you're doing that. And we've had several concerns about it, even during vaccine clinics. Oh, what are you doing here? You're too young. Well, I'm Indigenous. Well, yeah, of course you are. Stuff like that. That's not fair. It's not nice. And it's just this, it feels very subtle, but it's so painful. And I was thinking about this trauma Olympics, this idea of the trauma Olympics continually telling. And as we were preparing for this session, I was sharing with our team here how, we've trained thousands and thousands of people in Vancouver Coastal Health, and we've done it in a very safe environment of in a circle, and we go through timeline exercise, and we talk about our policy around Indigenous cultural safety, and we do a little bit of ad-libbing and telling stories. And most of our facilitators are Indigenous, and often they will add a bit of a personal story into how colonization or the Indian Act has affected their lives, or what has happened to their families and things like that. And so many times there'd always be at least one participant that would say in their comments, in their feedback summary, I wanted to hear more about your pain. and we just kind of go, oh, we're sorry we didn't go further into our painful experience and our painful stories of our families, but could we please not always ask for the painful stories? Can we just not do that? And I'm very mindful of our elders experiencing that, like our elders and residents that work right now with our program. And I say are in a loving way, not in an ownership way, like I possess them. I say that as our, as in our family. And I just want to clarify that because language is very important. Words are important. That they don't have to keep telling their story, right? So when they go and support in our community health centers or in the hospital, when they're trying to provide education and knowledge sharing with our teams, please be careful. Please don't ask them to tell their story of Indian residential school. They will, I know they will, because they're generous with their knowledge, but just be aware and be kind and ensure that we wrap the supports around them before we crack that open, right? And this is why the Kamloops Indian Residential School story just caught us all and just whooped, knocked our feet from under us, is because we weren't prepared. We weren't ready, emotionally ready for that news story to break the way it did. And so, you know, again, we talk about the trauma, we talk about why do people keep asking us to talk about all of that to justify things. We talk about that in the complaints process as well. We just talked this week about our patient complaints process and how come when we ask people to complain, right, and bring their thoughts forward, it's very important for them to have voice in that. We don't believe them. We want them to prove it. It's like, oh, can that just kind of be maybe not our first next step, but the few steps later? Let's just acknowledge that what they experienced happened first, right? Brittany, you spoke about something earlier today too, about as we try to create this cultural safety, and we use this language, again, language and words, tossing them around, Indigenous cultural safety, and what does that mean? What does it mean, Brittany?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about when we're learning, when everyone is learning more about the history leading up to this current day, it has really been about disruption and disconnection. And so in my mind or my thoughts, the antidote to that is actually connection. And so as we're learning about the history, you know, I just want to caution everyone about intellectualizing it too much. There isn't an instruction manual that we can go through. We won't just fix this by reading a book or going through those steps. And so, and those steps are important. They're still important to get us to the space that we need to be, but we do need to feel those findings and emotionally go there in a safe container within whatever safe container we have, because that's really how we're building that connection. I think as allies begin to feel this history and process it and connect to it on a deeper level, that's how allies will connect to us on a deeper level. And building our resiliency to have really courageous conversations. This, as we move forward on this path, we're going to have hard conversations together, but we can do that also with connection. So that's really what I see is we're in the learning stage, we're in the reading stage, but let's not intellectualize that too much to be the only stage, because we're feeling things and processing things emotionally. And once we kind of regulate our emotions and are able to process that, then we can connect on a deeper level and really move forward in such a good way. So Miranda, I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. I love your emphasis on connection. And I think that really, it resonates with what we're doing at a systemic level to create change. But I think it also matters a lot for the point of care, how we serve clients, and showing up in a way that really focuses on that relationship and just building a connection. And when we talk about trauma-informed care, we don't need to ask someone to share every single detail of their trauma in order for us to be able to support them. We don't need to know the traumatic stories in order to hold space for that trauma. So, we can approach our work, with clients and at the point of care in that way. And we can also support our systemic change in that way, that we don't need to always ask our elders or ask Indigenous people to share traumatic stories to know that that trauma exists. And we can hold space for it and be informed that it's there as we move forward in our work.
Absolutely. I think that's the takeaway today. I was trying to think of, where's the zinger that we needed? And there goes Miranda and Brittany again with the intel about what we would want our listeners, our colleagues, peers, and friends to really understand about today, and this talk about pulling from the headlines, National Indigenous Peoples Day, why it was different, why it was still very powerful in that reclaiming, reconciliation of our own identity, of who we are, and our resilience. And that is the word of the day, is the resilience. And so when you see Indigenous people as your clients or patients, just know they come from that strong line of resilience. And maybe what you see in front of you isn't really what's going on, right? There's more to it. There's something more. And you don't need to know every detail of it. You really don't. You just need to have enough knowledge about the history of this country and the history of Indigenous people to know that there was likely some sort of trauma in that person's life. We have no judgment and there's no scale. Was your trauma a 1 or a 10? I know we always like to try to scale these things and put some sort of, measure to it. Trauma is trauma, and everybody deals with it differently. History is history, and everybody deals with it differently. And what you take from history and what you use from history is up to you. For Indigenous people right now, what we want to do is reclaim. We want to rest. As you mentioned in that note, we want to rest for a little while. We're really tired of leading reconciliation, informing reconciliation, reclaiming our cultural practices. I wish I could learn my language. I wish I had time to learn my language. I don't have time. And it's not because it isn't important, it's because my work right now is very important. And that's where I tend to focus my additional time. And I know Miranda and Brittany do too. Miranda, I know you've got some final thoughts here again. You always come up with some great quotes for us to just kind of sit with and learn from. And I just, again, want to hand it over to you and thank both of you for being the strong Indigenous women, aunties in our circle, sharing your gracious knowledge with all of us and your absolute generosity. And Nikki and Jake, thanks again for helping us behind the scenes structure these talks so that we can share some time with everyone. Miranda, take us home.
Thank you. So last week I wrapped up our session with some words from Layla Saad in her book, Me and White Supremacy. And it was a bit of a call, an invitation to get our hands dirty in this work. So I thought I would share some more of her words from her book, Me and White Supremacy. She writes, "You will also need love for this journey because when the truth-telling gets really hard, you will need something more powerful than pain and shame to encourage you to keep going. Pain and shame are neither desirable nor sustainable as long-term strategies for transformational change. It is my hope that love is what initially brought you to this work. It is my conviction that love is what will keep you going.
Yes, beautiful, right? It's
Wow.
unsustainable. The pain is unsustainable. Yeah. Thank you again, Miranda. Amazing words to leave this session. Thank you everyone for joining us. Haichka Osiem.
Thank you so much again, Brittany, Miranda, and Leslie, for allowing me to help you out. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to our support information. So this is for Indigenous people at the top, and that's a PDF that that we can send out. And this is the LifeWorks, so that's for VCH staff, formerly known as EFAP. And so you can reach out that way for support if you need some support around this discussion. And again, thank you, everyone. Right.
Let's leave the chat open a little longer because people are still making some comments. We didn't get as many questions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. Lots of thank yous. Appreciating your generosity and your important sharing, giving you some recognition and letting you know you need some rest. I think you already know. Yeah.
I saw a shout out earlier for Elder Ruth. The comment was, Elder Ruth also brings unconditional love, and I'm so grateful for her.
I love that.
I love Elder Ruth. All right. Maybe this is a good point to leave us for the day today then, unless you have any final comments, Leslie, Miranda, or Brittany.
No, that was really, again, things just come out as we are talking, and that's the intention. That's the whole idea of just being around the kitchen table. We're not scripting a whole bunch of slides and information push outward. We're having honest conversations, just pulling from, again, the headlines, what we're feeling today. We are feeling a little tired. That's okay. That's okay. This actually is quite relieving when we get a chance to talk like this, again, getting it out there. And then all of these folks, Benson, Chris, Leah, Kathleen, Joanne, they help carry this. We don't have to be, we're not carrying it alone. And that's what I feel is so powerful when people start to, you know, they hear it and they go, oh, I can pick up a little. I can pick up a little. I know my whole new group of BFFs, the senior executive team, are all picking up some work. It just is so inspiring and uplifting to know that we have ready, willing, and able colleagues across this health system that want to be a part of the change. So the transformation is happening, and it's both system, service, structural, and together we're going to get through it. I have lots of hope. Thanks again, Nikki and Jake, for running the show. Bye for now.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.